As Edward Blackwood, a 52-year-old multimillionaire, sat down to dinner in New York's most exclusive restaurant, he never imagined a 23-year-old waitress would approach him and say, "Excuse me, sir, but my mother has a ring identical to yours." Edward glanced at his ring, a family heirloom passed down for generations, and felt time stand still. Only 3 rings of its kind existed in the world. One of them was on his finger. A second had vanished 25 years ago. And the third, it was supposed to be resting for eternity with the woman he had loved more than anything and lost forever. New York, November 2024. The Grand Carlyle restaurant, located in the heart of Manhattan, was the meeting point for the city's elite. Edward Blackwood, a 52-year-old hotel magnate and owner of a luxury chain valued at $500 million, was dining alone at his usual table by the window. Edward had the look of a man who had everything, yet whose soul was tormented. His graying hair, impeccably styled, matched a $3,000 Italian suit. On his left hand gleamed a unique ring, a white gold signet ring with a blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was a family heirloom, over 200 years old. He had come to the restaurant to privately commemorate the 25th anniversary of the company he had built with his late wife, Claire. But the celebration felt empty without her. Claire had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, taking all their future plans with her. "May I refill your wine, Mr. Blackwood?" a soft voice asked. Looking up, Edward saw a young waitress, about 23 years old. She was a brunette with expressive brown eyes and a timid smile. She wore the establishment's pristine uniform, a white shirt and a black vest. "Yes, please." Edward read her name tag, Sophie. As Sophie poured the wine, Edward noticed the young woman staring at him strangely, as if something was bothering her. "Is something wrong?" Edward inquired. Sophie paused, biting her lower lip. "Excuse me, sir, but could I ask you about your ring?" Surprised, Edward looked down at his left hand. "My ring?" "Yes." Sophie moved a little closer, speaking in a low voice. "The thing is, my mother has a ring that looks exactly like yours." Edward felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He froze, staring at the young woman in total disbelief. "That's impossible," he whispered. "This ring is one of a kind. It's been in my family for generations." "I know this sounds strange," Sophie replied nervously, "but when I saw your ring, I almost dropped my tray. It's identical to the one my mother has worn for as long as I can remember." Edward's heart began to race. Only 3 rings like this existed in the world. His great-grandfather had them custom-made in 1890 for his 3 sons. He wore the one he inherited from his father. The second had disappeared 25 years ago, when his twin brother Charles died in a mountaineering accident. "And the third?" "What is your mother's name?" Edward asked, his voice trembling. "Claire Martin," Sophie answered. "Why, do you know her?" Edward felt the ground give way beneath him. Claire. His late wife's name was Claire, but her last name was Blackwood, not Martin, and she had died 5 years ago. "How old is your mother?" Edward asked, trying to control his emotions. 47, Sophie said. "Mr. Blackwood, you've gone pale." Edward tried to process the information. Claire would be exactly 47 if she were still alive, but that was impossible. He had attended her funeral. He had seen her casket. "Sophie," Edward said in a hoarse voice, "could you do something very important for me? Could you show me a picture of your mother?" Sophie looked at him, confused, but took out her cell phone. She scrolled through her gallery and showed him a photo. Edward stared at the screen, and his world came to a halt. It was Claire. His Claire, alive. Edward grabbed the phone with trembling hands, staring at the photo as if it were an apparition. It was definitely Claire, without a shadow of a doubt. Her hair was shorter and she looked a little older, but it was her. The same green eyes, the same smile, the same way she tilted her head. "Mr. Blackwood?" Sophie watched him, worried. "Are you all right? This woman," Edward pointed at the photo. "Where does she live?" "In Philadelphia, sir." "Why? Do you know her?" Edward shot to his feet, knocking over his wineglass. The other restaurant patrons turned to look at him, curious. "Sophie, you have to tell me everything about your mother. Absolutely everything." "Sir, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Edward sat back down, trying to regain his composure. "Forgive me, it's just... Your mother looks so much like someone I knew a long time ago." "Well," Sophie began, still uneasy. "My mother's name is Claire Martin. She's lived in Philadelphia since I was born. She was a secretary until she took an early retirement 2 years ago. And your father?" "I don't have a father. At least my mother always told me he died when I was a baby, in a work accident." A chill ran down Edward's spine. "A work accident?" "Yes, he was an architect. My mother says he died when a building under construction collapsed." Edward had been an architect before dedicating himself to the hotel business, and he remembered perfectly orchestrating his own death in a construction accident to run away with Claire 25 years earlier. But the Claire in the photo was his wife, the one who had died 5 years ago. "Sophie," Edward said very seriously, "what is your date of birth?" "March 15th. Why all the questions?" Edward did a quick mental calculation. If Sophie was 23, she was born in March 2001, exactly 9 months after the last time he had seen his Claire alive before the supposed car accident. "My God," Edward breathed. "It can't be." "What can't be?" Edward looked at Sophie again. Now that he knew what to look for, the resemblance was striking. She had his nose, the curve of his eyebrows, his long slender hands. "Sophie," Edward said in a broken voice, "did your mother ever talk to you about a man named Edward?" The young woman frowned. "No. Well, sometimes, when she has a little wine, she mentions an Edward and becomes melancholic, but she always refuses to say more." Edward felt tears welling up in his eyes. Claire was alive, and if his suspicions were correct, Sophie was his daughter. "I have to see your mother," Edward declared, standing up again. "Immediately." "But, sir, it's 10 o'clock at night, and she's in Philadelphia, a 2-hour drive away." "I don't care. Can you call her? Tell her to come?" Sophie took a step back. "Mr. Blackwood, you're really scaring me. What is going on?" Edward realized he was acting like a madman. He took a deep breath to try to calm down. "Sophie, what I'm about to tell you will sound incredible, but I believe your mother is my wife." "Your wife? But that's impossible. My mother isn't married." "My wife, Claire, died in a car accident 5 years ago. At least, that's what I thought." Sophie looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "Sir, my mother hasn't been in any accident. She's perfectly fine in Philadelphia." Edward took off his ring and handed it to Sophie. "Is it exactly like your mother's?" Sophie examined the piece of jewelry carefully. "It's identical. It even has the same engraving inside. Eternal Love." A shiver ran through Edward. Only he and Claire knew about that inscription. "Sophie," Edward said with determination, "I have to go to Philadelphia. Tonight. Will you come with me?" "But, sir—" "I will give you $1,000 to come with me. I just need you to take me to your mother." Sophie stared at him for a long moment. Then she slowly nodded. "All right, but if it turns out you're crazy, I'm calling the police." Edward managed a smile for the first time in years. "If I'm crazy, you can call whoever you want." Edward's Audi sped down the highway toward Philadelphia at 11 p.m. Sophie, sitting in the passenger seat, was still nervous but also intrigued. "Can you please explain what's really going on?" she asked. Edward kept his eyes on the road. 5 years ago, my wife Claire died in a car accident, or at least that's the official story. And you think my mother is your wife? The rings, the name, the age, your birth date, it all lines up." They reached Philadelphia at 1 a.m. Sophie guided Edward through the narrow streets of the old city to a small apartment in a 3-story building. They climbed the stairs in silence. Sophie knocked gently on the door. "Mom, it's me, Sophie." Slow footsteps were heard from inside the apartment. The door opened a crack to reveal a woman in a bathrobe, her hair messy. Edward's heart stopped. It was Claire, his Claire, alive and well, standing before him after 5 years of believing she was dead. Claire saw Edward and the color drained from her face. "Edward," she whispered. "Hello, Claire," Edward replied, his voice cracking. "We have a lot to talk about." Claire turned to Sophie, her eyes filled with panic. "What have you done?" "Mom, is it true? Is he my father?" Claire buried her face in her hands and began to sob. "Come in," she finally breathed. "I knew this day would come. If you're captivated by this story, don't hesitate to give it a like and subscribe. Now, let's get back to the story." Silence filled the small living room. Claire had put on a jacket over her bathrobe and was staring at Edward, her eyes red from crying. "How long did you know I was alive?" Edward asked. Always. I never believed you died in that construction accident. Then why did you fake your own death? Claire took a deep breath. Because I found out about your real business, the deals with Victor Costello, the money laundering, the threats. Edward tensed up. How did you know about Victor? He followed me one day. He warned me that if I didn't cooperate, we would both end up dead. Sophie watched them, completely confused. Who is Victor Costello? A criminal, Edward answered bitterly. Someone I never should have gotten involved with. Claire continued. Victor offered me a deal. If I faked my own death and disappeared, he would leave you alone. But if I stayed, he would kill us both. And you accepted? I was pregnant, Edward. 2 months pregnant. I couldn't risk our baby's life. Edward looked at Sophie differently. Why didn't you tell me anything? Because you would have tried to stop me, and we both would have been killed. Sophie stood up abruptly. Are you telling me I've lived a lie for 23 years? I did it to protect you, Claire said. You told me my father was dead. I grew up believing I was an orphan. Edward moved closer to Sophie. I'm so sorry. If only I had known you existed. After my fake death, Victor left you alone, Claire continued. But he threatened to kill us if I ever tried to contact you. I lived in fear for all those years, until 5 years ago when Victor died in a mob hit. I read about it in the newspaper. We were finally free. Then why didn't you come back to me? Because too much time had passed, and I wasn't the same woman anymore. Sophie walked to the door. I need some air. I need to think. She left the apartment, leaving Edward and Claire alone for the first time in over 20 years. Claire and Edward remained silent after Sophie left. The weight of more than 2 decades of separation hung heavily between them. She looks like you, Claire finally said. She has your spirit, Edward replied with a sad smile. Claire took off her ring and handed it to Edward. I suppose I should give this back to you. Edward shook his head. That ring belongs to you. It always has. Edward, after your supposed death, I gave up all the shady business. I sold everything. I got out of that life. Really? Victor had gotten what he wanted. He had taken the only thing that truly mattered to me. Claire looked at him with new interest. I'm glad to hear that. Claire, I know many years have passed, but do you think we could try to get to know each other again? Claire hesitated. Edward, we're not the same people we were 25 years ago. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe now we can build something better. Just then the door opened and Sophie walked in. She had been crying but seemed calmer. I've been thinking, Sophie announced, and I've decided I want to know my father, but on a few conditions. Edward nodded. Name them. First, no more lies. Ever. Agreed, Edward said. Second, I want to learn about your life, but slowly. Of course, Claire approved. And third, I want you to promise to never put business before family again. Edward approached Sophie. I promise you, over these past 5 years, I've learned that all the money in the world is worthless without family. Sophie looked at him for a long time, then nodded. Okay, we can try. Claire came over and hugged them both. Maybe it's not too late for us to be a family. Edward felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. 6 months later, the terrace of Edward's most luxurious hotel in Santa Barbara was decorated for a special celebration. It was Sophie's 24th birthday, and for the first time in her life, she was celebrating it with both of her parents. The last few months had been a slow but beautiful process of getting to know one another. Sophie had quit her job as a waitress to start studying hotel management, financed by Edward. Claire had moved to New York into an apartment near Edward's, and they were gradually rebuilding their relationship. How do I look? Sophie asked, showing off the blue dress Claire had given her. You look stunning, Claire said, adjusting her necklace. Edward approached, holding a small box. Sophie, I have something I want to give you. Sophie opened the box and found a ring inside. It wasn't identical to Edward's and Claire's, but it followed the same design, this time in rose gold. Is this... I had this ring made especially for you. It carries on the family tradition, but it's unique, just like you. Sophie slipped the ring on her finger and started to cry. Dad. It was the first time she had ever called him that. Edward felt his own eyes well up. I love you, my daughter. Claire came over and hugged them both. I never thought this day would come. During dinner, Sophie stood up to make a toast. 6 months ago, I thought I was fatherless. Today, I have a complete family. The road hasn't been easy, and we're still learning how to be parents and a daughter after so many lost years. But I believe the best families aren't the ones that are born perfect, but the ones that choose to work together to become so. Edward raised his glass. To second chances. Claire raised hers. To love that outlasts time. Sophie smiled. And to families who find each other when they least expect it. 3 years later, Edward and Claire remarried in an intimate but emotional ceremony. Sophie was their witness and walked her mother down the aisle. Edward had donated most of his hotels to a charitable foundation, keeping only 2 to live comfortably. Claire now ran the foundation, which helped separated families, turning her own pain into a mission. Sophie, who graduated with honors, managed one of the family hotels, proving she had inherited both her father's business acumen and her mother's compassion. One evening, as they were having dinner on the terrace of their home in the New York suburbs, Sophie raised her wine glass. "Do you know what's strangest about this whole story?" "What's that?" Edward and Claire asked in unison. "That it all started because I recognized a ring. If I hadn't been working in that restaurant that day, if I hadn't seen Dad's ring, we might have never found each other." Edward took Claire's and Sophie's hands. "Fate has mysterious ways of bringing families together." Claire smiled. "Sometimes the most precious things are found when we stop looking for them." "And sometimes," Sophie added, "happy endings happen when you least expect them, after years of waiting." Edward looked at the ring on his hand, then at the ones on Claire's and Sophie's fingers. 3 rings, 3 lives that had been separated and then reunited. Their story was proof that true love can survive decades of separation, that families can rebuild even after years of necessary lies, and that sometimes miracles come in the form of a coincidence in elegant restaurants. If this story moved you to tears, if you believe that families can find each other even after decades and that true love triumphs over time, leave a little heart below. I want to know your opinion. Have you ever experienced a coincidence that turned your life upside down? Do you believe there are signs from fate guiding us toward those we love? Tell me your stories of reunions and miraculous coincidences in the comments. If this story touched you, hit like. If you believe that family love transcends time and distance, subscribe so you don't miss other stories that prove miracles do happen. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in family second chances, and leave a comment.